Hello there. Thanks for checking in. Dr. Neptune here. And today I'm going to talk about my Bob Dylan collection. I had to think a lot about how to talk about Bob Dylan. Everyone knows him and his music in some way or another, and he's a Nobel Prize winner for literature. And I'm just going to start with this. This is a CD box set, one of the first ones of the CD era, box sets that is, and it's called Biograph. It came out in 1985, and I think I got it shortly after that. Remember that I got it from the Columbia Record Club, and this was a kind of a retrospective of his career to this point, and as I've said in other videos, one of the great things about these early box sets is their size, because you get these huge format booklets with these great big pictures and lots of text and everything. And that's actually always been one of my favorite Bob Dylan pictures. And then these liner notes also, very extensive, so those are the great things about the format here, but also the drawback is it's very obnoxiously unwieldy, and storage is a problem, and so it's got its pluses and minuses. But this was one of the very first CD box sets that I ever got. I already knew Bob Dylan. I kind of grew up listening to him from my sister's collection, and I learned a whole lot from reading these liner notes from all these songs. Some are the studio versions. It's kind of a greatest hits, in that most of what you'd expect to be here are on here. But there's also a lot of live versions of songs and outtakes and things like that. So this is what really kicked off my Bob Dylan fandom, I think. I was so interested in the way that the songs that I did know, he would reinterpret, and I think of him a lot as sort of his own remix machine. It's legendary that when you see him in concert, which I have twice, he'll rearrange songs so much so that sometimes you don't even know what song it is until he gets to the chorus. And that's frustrating to some fans, especially maybe casual ones who want to hear the songs they know, the way they know them. But it's always been one of the greatest things about being a Dylan fan for me, is seeing how he reinterprets himself constantly over time. So Biograph was really the start of that. And that came out in 85, and I almost got the sense then, maybe it's just because I was a teenager, that this was kind of an end-of-career retrospective. After all, why would you put out something like this as anything but a summation of what you'd done? But I couldn't have been more wrong, and it turns out he was just getting started. That was 35 years ago, and to this day, literally, he's still putting out great stuff. In fact, as of this recording, it was just a few weeks ago that he released his newest album, called Rough and Rowdy Ways. Here with a 9-point review from Pitchfork. And then here's the Rolling Stone review. Gives him 4.5 stars. And these are the music sources that I trust the most with their critical judgment. Guardian gives it 5. And there's a really interesting alternate review in the Guardian also. Still gives it a great ranking, 4 out of 5 here. But as you can see from the headline, this is an interesting discussion from a female critic whose work I've read a lot before in the Guardian, about how, as great as this album is, it really does reflect Dylan's own cultural awareness, I guess, male boomer perspectives. This is not at all criticizing Dylan or being political about it, but it was an interesting other take on his new album. But his new album is fantastic, and really one of the best of his career. So he hasn't let up. He's been recording and touring. I saw him twice. Once he was very good. The second time he was great. And of course he hasn't toured this year because of the virus, but I'm sure he'll get back on the road soon. So I wanted to start with that. And then there's so many Dylan albums that it's difficult to kind of talk about to make any sense, but I'm going to start with these, which are individual album releases from my collection. I only have a handful, really. I don't know how many he's made, dozens, but these are the ones I have. This is Blonde on Blonde, one of his best known and one of his best reissued version from some years back. And then Blood on the Tracks, probably my favorite Dylan album. My first favorite. This came out in 75, and this has Tangled Up in Blue on it, which was probably the first song that I really had to try hard to learn the words to because I was so interested in them. I wanted to be able to know them and sing along to them when I heard the song on the radio in my bedroom. So this has always been a huge favorite. It's gone through a couple of editions. This is a remastered edition with a big crack in it. So I always wanted to make sure to have that in my collection. Here's the Basement Tapes, released around the same time as Blood on the Tracks, but old recordings from the late 60s with the band. More on that later. This is the live album, Hard Rain. This actually was one of the very first Dylan albums that I really loved. My sister had this on 8-track, and these are live versions, some of his older songs, but most of them from a number of them from Blood on the Tracks, performed in a just totally fierce manner with the Rolling Thunder Review. And I was stunned at the difference between, for example, how he sang Lay Lady Lay here versus the version I knew on record. Turns it into a screaming version of the song, and that was my first inkling of what Dylan could do with his own music. So Hard Rain's an all-time classic, and then fast forward many years later to the late 90s. This was kind of what many, I guess, would call his late career comeback. He went through a period from the early 80s to mid 90s where a lot of his work wasn't quite as good as it could have been. Always a few gems on those albums during those times, but by and large, not a great period in my opinion, and I think a lot of people share that. But starting with these albums, he really came back to form as far as I'm concerned. So this is from 06, Modern Times, and then Together Through Life. He always a surprise, one for surprises. He released this one, Christmas album, around that same time. Just stunning. And then here's a digital download from iTunes. Probably, I guess, the last Dylan album I bought in this format. So Tempest, another really great late career triumph. I kind of get the sense that a lot of people think Dylan, a lot of casual fans might think that Dylan's, good career ended in maybe the 70s. But obviously I disagree. And so what I'm going to show you now is the Bootleg series, which is a series of archival releases from Dylan and his record company. I have the complete collection here, and this is a great place to start if you're a casual fan but want to know more. Any one of these volumes is well worth looking into. So I'm going to go in the order of their release, which starts here. And this is the Bootleg series, volumes 1 through 3, so a 3 CD set. Came out in 1991, and I've always kind of laughed when artists release so-called bootleg albums. This is an official release by the record company. Bootlegs are generally understood to be illegal recordings circulated by fans, and Dylan had a ton of those in existence, so maybe this was kind of a joke to call these official releases bootlegs as well. And a lot of the songs that appeared on these bootleg series releases did originally appear on those fan-released bootleg albums or cassettes. But anyway, starting here with 91, all these songs come from all phases of his career, really, up until about that present time. So alternate versions of songs and B-sides and cuts from deep in the archives. This bootleg series is amazing. Every one of them comes with these liner notes and historical information about the recordings and everything else. So started it with that, and then the series didn't go chronologically. It kind of jumped around. Oops, where am I here? I'm sorry, I thought I had this sorted out. Okay, never mind. As one of my subscribers remarked, this is harder to do than it looks. Film and talk and think at the same time and show. So I was looking for volume 2 of the bootleg series, and I was confused, but it turns out that I should have been looking for volume 4. So this is the next release in the series. This came out in 98, so between 91 and 98, that was series 1 and 2. But then after that, there's been a steady stream of releases, one every other year or even sooner. So they've really been pouring these things out, along with Dylan's other regular album releases, including that last one I showed you that was just released. His last several albums have been standards, Frank Sinatra type songs, which are amazing and great. So these have kind of accompanied his own releases. This is the Royal Albert Hall concert. This is the famous concert that even casual Dylan fans may have heard about, where right when he switched from being a folk singer to a rock singer, switched from acoustic to electric. A lot of the folk singers objected to that. And here, famously, one of the fans, just before Like a Rolling Stone, calls him Judas. Unbelievable that people would take things that seriously. But anyway, this is a moment that's been enshrined in legend, and is actually, I think it is on video. And Don't Look Back, the documentary of the time. And then Dylan says, "I don't believe you. You're a liar." He turns to his band, which is the band, and he says, "Play fucking loud," and they rip into a heavy metal version of Like a Rolling Stone to answer that. But this had been known as the Royal Albert Hall concert, labeled as such in a famous bootleg that was widely circulated, but it was actually recorded in Manchester. So that's why the ironic quotation marks there. I'm pretty sure the first set is acoustic, the second set is electric, so it even heightens the tension that some of his audience felt in those days. Just looking back on it, I've heard about this my whole life. It seems like a big deal over nothing, but at the same time, fans can be really passionate, and when they feel like their hero has somehow betrayed them, I guess that's what they do. But it's a great, great live album. These are all amazing releases. Here, the next release, Volume 5, is the Rolling Thunder Review. It skips to 1975. And these are live shows as well. Rolling Thunder Review, that's the concert. Those are the songs that are on the Hard Rain CD. This is an expanded edition of it. Had many guests with him on this tour. There was recently a documentary released on Netflix about the whole thing too. Pretty interesting, good live footage in that one. And his performance here is just amazing. I've always loved this era of Dylan's career. So all these live versions of these songs, just great. And then the next volume went back in time to 1964. Philharmonic Hall in New York. This is an all-acoustic set, right when he was first really popular. This is a really, really charming set. Dylan is very endearing in his banter, the way that he talks to the crowd. He seems sort of shy at the same time, confident, joking, really awesome picture of that moment in time, and all these classic songs too. Next volume, number 7, is actually a soundtrack to an excellent documentary directed by Martin Scorsese called No Direction Home. And live versions, alternate takes, and so forth. Some of the best versions of some of these songs that I know. Great, great film, though, No Direction Home. Here's volume 8, Telltale Signs. This is from 89 to 06, a period which most casual fans probably are not at all familiar with, really. But an awesome period. Some of his best songs, I think, including Mississippi, which there are 2 versions of here. Ring Them Bells. Most of the time, one of my all-time favorite Dylan songs. So late career Dylan. Dylan's voice, was never a perfect instrument. I wouldn't call him a great singer, but I do think he's a great vocalist, one of the best of all times, interpreting his own poetry. And his voice has gotten deeper and cragglier and croakier, but he's made amazing use of it. Much like Johnny Cash in his older releases. Okay, here's the next volume, volume 9, called the Widmark Demos. These are the earliest releases in the series. I think they're the earliest recorded examples of Dylan. And these are demos of some songs which became standards of his, famous ones, some other more obscure ones. Basically, as you can see from the picture here, this is a portrait of a very young Dylan. Mostly acoustic guitar, I think. Demo is trying to sell these songs, working as a songwriter. So the demo is to show the singer how to sing it. But a lot of them turned out to be his own songs. Okay, so let's see, that was volume 9. Then starting with volume 10, this series started to get really supersized. Pretty sure that everything I've shown you except for this, Telltale Signs, but everything else that I've shown you was only in the 2 or 3 CD version that I have. This, it turns out, in my research for this video, I found out that there had been a 3 CD version of this, which I would have loved to have. Looks like it might be difficult to get a hold of now, but this was a 3 CD version. I have 2. Then they started having multiple versions of these bootleg series. So you would have maybe a 1 CD version or a 2 CD, and then an expanded 6 CD version or a multi-deluxe version. So some of what I have reflects choices that I made once they started really going hard on these reissues. So starting with volume 10, this is called Another Self-Portrait, and this is one of the more kind of obscure eras in Dylan's career to a lot of people, myself included. I don't know, I think I see it as a transitional period, right, ramping up to the mid-70s with Blood on the Tracks and everything that came after. So another self-portrait is a kind of a weird album. It's actually it says a 4-disc set, and it comes with a couple of kind of deluxe edition books, photographs from the time, really deeply historically documented. Here's Time Passes Slowly, Photographs and More. I think this is no text in here. It's just picture after picture of Dylan from this era in the early 70s. So, volume 10 of the series, and then volume 11 is one of my favorite ones in the series. I showed you the Basement tapes earlier. It first came out as a double LP in '74, and then double CD, which I showed. This is the complete Basement tapes. It's a 6 CD edition. It includes everything that Dylan and the band recorded in that house up in upstate New York in the late 60s. So similar to the previous package here, it's got extensive notes, pictures, descriptions. Here's the photographs and more from there. That's the album cover. Then I want to show this, which is a book about the Basement tapes. It's called The Old Weird America. Greil Marcus, a rock critic, I showed his book Lipstick Traces in my Sex Pistols video. And this is just an amazingly detailed story of the recording sessions, and a song-by-song analysis of everything that's on the Basement tapes here. So I love just diving into this 6 CD set, seeing what comes up at random. It's called The Old Weird America. A lot of the songs are old and weird, old country songs, or new songs that sound like old songs, which so many of the band's songs sound like, for sure. But that was the deluxe edition of the Basement tapes, volume 11, I think, of the bootleg series. Alright, then after that I had to start making some decisions as to whether I really wanted to get, the deluxe edition of everything Dylan, or if I would be more satisfied with, a step down. So, mainly out of concerns for storage space, as well as the fact that, those picture books are great, but there's really only so many pictures I want to see of Bob Dylan, and I don't think I need to see any more. For that reason, I started deciding to buy just the regular release of a lot of these things, including this one. So this is the best of the cutting edge, 65 through 66. You see the picture here. That's an outtake from the Blonde on Blonde sessions. Here. So a lot of the music from Blonde on Blonde is on here. But this is a 2 CD version of it. And it was also released, I think, as a 6 CD edition, like the Basement tapes one I just showed, as well as an 18-disc Ultimate Deluxe edition. And when I saw that was the kind of thing that they were starting to push out, I really said, okay, I really don't need that or want that, or need to have 10 different versions of Like a Rolling Stone. So I'm sure there are completists out there that have those editions, but this is good enough for me. I think I have enough Dylan anyway. So this is from that era, 65, 66. That's volume 12, okay. And then this is volume 13, Trouble No More. These are all live versions of songs, 79 to 81. This is Dylan's famous Christian period, where he did a couple albums which were mainly, if not gospel songs, they were certainly about Christianity and religion and things like that. It's a tough period of Dylan's career that tends to be most alienating to a lot of people, both casual and stronger fans. But like all Dylan eras, there are always good things to pick out of it, and these are all fantastic live versions of these songs. For me, as I think maybe for a lot of listeners, hearing song after song about God and Jesus can get a little old. But if they're sung well, once in a while, why not? This kind of reminds me of Elvis's gospel songs, which again, I don't listen to regularly, but when I do hear one, I always love the way he sings them. So it's an interesting phase of Dylan's career, Trouble No More, and really great live versions of all those songs. And then marked the shift to digital music. So the next 2 bootleg series I have purchased on digitally, and I'm going to show you those here in just one moment on my tablet. This was ready to go. Oh, hold on. Okay, sorry, I just had to call that up. So after volume 13 of the bootleg series, volume 14 was a reissue of my favorite album that I showed you before, Blood on the Tracks. This one called More Blood, More Tracks. And for this one, this came out in, I think, a 2 CD sampler version, but of course I needed to get everything I could from this amazing album, so I got the 6 CD deluxe edition. Luckily they weren't making an 18 one. But I got it digitally so I wouldn't have to continually shuffle CDs in and out, which turned out to be a great decision because this is something that I often listen to in the car, and I just call it up. I stream it from Amazon, and then I shuffle it and find version after version of all these songs that I've always loved, done in different ways per Dylan style. So, this was the Blood on the Tracks bootleg series, volume 14, 6 CD version. Blood on the Tracks was recorded twice in completion, so all of these alternate versions and studio versions of the songs were from the first of the 2 recordings, which was in New York City, and most of them featured only Dylan on his acoustic guitar, as well as a bass player and an organ player. And they're all mostly very hushed, or not hushed, but acoustic versions of the songs. And then the whole thing was re-recorded a few months later in Minnesota, where Dylan's from, with full band, and those are the livelier songs, including Tangled Up in Blue that you hear on the final album. So the final album has 5 songs from each session, essentially kind of like an acoustic and electric versions, and this set just expands upon all those. Apparently there's no alternate takes of the Minneapolis or Minnesota songs, so you only hear remastered versions of the ones that you've always heard on the album, which is fine because they sound amazing. But then all the New York versions you hear all the multiple takes of. So that was a great addition to my collection. And then the last edition of the bootleg series is this one. This is called Traveling Through, Volume 15, 1967 through 1969. This was released last year in 2019. And you see it features Johnny Cash. This was the period of Dylan's career, sometimes referred to as his country career, after the recording of the Basement Tapes and the beginning of the 70s. He recorded Nashville Skyline and John Wesley Harding, sorry. John Barleycorn was a Jack London book. John Wesley Harding. And so country or country flavored part of Dylan's career. And then also during this time he appeared on the Johnny Cash show on TV. Johnny Cash had a really popular TV show, and he and Dylan recorded a bunch of songs as rehearsals for that, and then also on the show itself. So they're on here. Some Dylan songs, some Cash songs, some other songs, but they they sing and play on both of them. It's great document, amazing show from both men. And so to this day, that's the last in the bootleg series, but there promises to be more. They seem to keep finding new stuff to come up with. And just to close out this talk here, I want to show you this, which is Bob Dylan's Chronicles, Volume 1. So far, the only volume of his memoirs or autobiography that he's put out. This came out in 2004. It's a fantastic read, and per Bob Dylan's usual method, he can be frustrating. He doesn't really talk much about the eras that casual fans might most be familiar with. Instead, he jumps around. He talks about the very beginning of his career, and then some of this part of the book is about the mid-'80s. He his writing is as elliptical and interesting and funny as his poetry is, I would say. This is a fantastic book. I really hope he puts out another volume soon. And then finally, talking about Dylan's work with the band, I've got this live album called Before the Flood, released in 1974, right around the same time as the Basement Tapes. And as you can see, it's a compilation of both Dylan and band songs. It's very weird, too, because I was really prepared to talk about this and say that it was the most disappointing Dylan album that I have, because I didn't like the way that he sings. I thought his voice sounded weird. But to verify, the CDs are in the CD player, because earlier I was playing them. To verify that his voice sounded weird, I was going to try to describe it. Some sort of nasally honking sound or something is in my memory what it was. Lo and behold, I thought he sounded great, so I don't know what's going on there. It is kind of typical of Dylan that and a lot of times you'll hear something and not like it or not understand it, at least for me, and then come back to it sometime later and discover that it works after all. But I was all prepared to bag all over this thing and say that it was not worth listening to, but now I'm going to listen to the whole thing. I listened to a bunch of these songs halfway through to listen to how he sang, and he sounds great. So there you have that, Dylan and the band. Band is always a great live band, so here is an awesome live album of theirs, live at Watkins Glen from, I think, 74. Watkins Glen, a huge racetrack in upstate New York. And then, of course, with Dylan and the band together, you've got The Last Waltz. Dylan appeared in this film. Anyone who likes rock and roll at all should watch this film. It's great performances all the way through, not only from Dylan and the band, but also Van Morrison there. Here's Neil Young, Joni Mitchell. This is Neil Diamond, Eric Clapton. Also directed by Martin Scorsese, supposedly the band's last concert. And then here's the expanded soundtrack edition box set, 4 CDs. So it expands on the original album. Soundtrack of this was a 3 LP set. And then later it released as a 2 CD edition, and then expanded to a 4 CD edition that you see here. Okay, so that was Bob Dylan, Nobel Prize winner, living legend. I hope that you found that interesting. Thank you for watching. If you watched this far, thanks for subscribing if you're one of those. If you liked this, click the like button. I think that helps me somehow. More people might see it that way. I'm not sure how this works, but thanks for your attention, and I will be back soon.